another important thing that I wanted to go over is, let's take a look at this source code. I'm not going to lie or anything like this. I did this completely in a poor way to show a new person to programming, okay? I should have started out by saying, here's what a variable is. Do you remember in math where you do x a squared plus b squared equals c squared? Or do you remember solve for x? If not, here's a little instructional on that. Let's say you have a math problem. What is 5 plus 5? Solve for it, okay? Okay, we know how to count because we have 5 fingers on one hand and 5 on the other, and instantly that makes us think, oh, 10. So 5 plus 5 equals 10. Now, in algebra, I'm going so low level on this. So in algebra, a variable, like down the road, they'll be like 5 plus 5 equals not 10, not question mark, but they'll call it x. 5 plus 5 equals x. Okay? Let's go with capital. And then they'll say, solve for x. Okay, and then your duty is to be like, I'm thinking back. Then your duty is to be like, x equals 5 plus 5, and then you'll add 5 plus 5, and that equals 10. You'll add this side of the equation to each other. That equals 10, and then you say in your answer, x equals 10. Perfect. Or you could just leave it as x equals 10 and circle that, and then hand it into your teacher. Okay, basic review of algebra. Now, what is x, where we're solving for it? X is a variable. We could have called it y if we wanted. We could say, solve for y, and we would eventually say, y equals 10. Isn't that perfect? Isn't that awesome? It's kind of easy. So, y is a variable. Now, Algebra 102 will give you problems like this. Instead of 5 plus 5 equals what? Question mark, or x, solve for x, they will instead say something like 5 plus y equals x. Where y equals 5. Okay. Forget. Okay. So, yeah. Let's get rid of that. Where y equals 5, and so our equation. Oh, and then at the end, they'll of course say, why don't you solve for x? Now you have two variables in the equation. You have an x and you have a y. Uber cool. You have an x and you have a y. Too cool. And they tell you what y is equal. So basically, they just want you to plug in the y value and solve for x like you're already used to because you studied my last demonstration so closely. Great. So to do that, you would write 5 plus 5, because we're plugging in the value of y, equals x, and then you would thereafter write 10 equals x. And notice I put these parentheses there just to imply further that we plugged in a value for y, okay? And then, so those are what variables are. You can set a variable, y, equal to something, and to set a variable equal to something, you just say y equals 5, and then from there on, it will work out. So let's do a quick example where so in programming, these are called integers. 5 is an integer, 6 is an integer, 5.5, that's not an integer. Okay, so just easy numbers are integers. You can go negative and positive too. Just don't like start dividing whole numbers. You just want, okay, so let me show you this equation. X plus y equals z. Whoa, yikes. Okay, so let's make those variables. So we're going to start with this variable x, and so int x. We just made a variable. Let's make the second variable, int, and what am I going to say next? I'm going to say y. And the third variable should be, what am I going to say after I say int? I'm going to say z. Okay, good. Now, these variables are like declared in memory. They're kind of declared, like x is going to be an integer, y, the symbol y is going to be an integer, and the symbol z is going to be an integer. And by symbol, I just mean character. Or set of characters. From here, we need to start plugging in numbers, because you can't solve x plus y equals z until you add a constraint. And our constraint will be where x equals 5 and y equals 5. And then we're going to say, solve for z. We're actually going to solve for z here at the end, just because usually they say solve for x, and in math you're always going to be like solve for x, and you're just going to think solve for x. But I started typing before I fully thought out the situation, so we're going to solve for z, and you can solve for whatever you want. So how do we add these constraints to our little problem? Well, we can either put it on the same line, int x equals 5, and 5 of course is an integer, so it will fit into this integer. Or we can, so there we set up 5 in this row, or we can on a new line say y equals 5. That works too. And the second time you use the variable, you don't have to say int. In fact, if you do, it's going to barf out an error and be like, hey, you already said y was an int up here, so what are you doing trying to say it's an int here? Are you trying to redeclare a new variable? If so, like, change the name to something unique. Otherwise, if you want to refer to this old y, just do that. You don't have to specify that it's an int, because it remembers, oh yeah, this guy said it's an int. And of course it'll only remember that within this little do stuff now function. So within these bounds, within these brackets, it's going to remember, oh, he said y is an int down there. And I wonder if I can, I don't know, okay, never mind. So this is the second way. Here's the first way you can declare a variable. Here's the second way, 2 lines. Start out by declaring that it's going to be an int, and then actually set it to the int that you want. And there's no third way. It's a bummer, but there's no third way. So now we have x and we have y. So where x equals 5 and y equals 5. Now we need to solve for z. Now z is an empty variable, and we need to set z equals, and now we just write out the equation. So here it is. You don't need to declare it twice, so you just add x and y to each other, and you don't drop it to the ground. you drop it into z, the z variable. Okay, so that is how variables work in most languages based off of C. You say, because you have to tell the computer, okay, what kind of a variable is this? Because it's that kind of a, it's a little lower level. Java isn't that low of a level, but they have you do it anyway for good measure and some speed benefits. So I'll cut that out. Okay, so now we've defined z, and once the computer, it's going to tick through this little function that we're going through. Once the computer gets to here, it's gonna know what value z is, and it should find that it's 10. But how do we prove that? Well, let's use a message box. Okay, so I just pasted the code for the message box from the bottom of my thing, which I had commented out so it wouldn't work, so it wouldn't, shoot the message box. And it says here's the math result, and instead of, you're going to change one thing about that code. You're going to change it from math result to just z. There you go. And this stuff is now obsolete. It's like I deleted it. I can delete it just for clarity. Okay, forget it. Okay, so now I'm going to save it, and I'm going to hit the run button. And now our form is going to ignore all of this stuff, and it's just going to do this little math for us. And we click do stuff, and here's the math result, 10. So it took our 5, and it took our other 5 in these variables. It added them, put the computation result in z, and then it showed that to the screen. It showed here's the math result, and it concatenated the number 10 onto that string, and then it showed it to us. Here we go. So that's what I'm talking about.